Well, good morning, Gathering Network kids. Welcome to Kids Zone here this morning. I'm so thankful to get to be with you. Some of you are on spring break. I hope you're having a great spring break. Hopefully the weather will be nice for you this week. Maybe some of you are getting to travel to different places, and that is so exciting for you. It's been a few weeks since we've been together, and we have been in the Old Testament. We've talked about Adam and Eve, Noah, the Tower of Babel, and today we are going to look at the story of Abraham and Sarah in Genesis 12 through 21. Here this morning, I'm going to sort of shorten the story down for us from chapters 12 through 21. That's a lot to try to learn about in one day, but I'm going to combine it all into one story for us here this morning. Now, the story of Abraham and Sarah is a long and winding road about two people trying and failing and sometimes being successful along the way in trusting God. God continues to hold up his end of his promise, which we're going to learn about here in a minute. Even when Abraham and Sarah couldn't find faith to believe in God's plan, Abraham is going to play a big role in God's plan to reconnect his creation and come back into relationship with his creation. But Abraham doesn't know that yet. So we're going to find in this story that just like Adam and Eve, Noah, and the Tower of Babel, God will ask Abraham and Sarah to trust him and to follow his instructions. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But the good news is that God still shows up again and again and again and follows through with what he says he's going to do. We find Abraham as a descendant of Noah, meaning he was related to Noah. Years and years have passed since the flood, and things really still have not gotten any better with humans. People are still cruel and mean to one another. They still experience sickness and sadness and hurt. The world is really full of tears. Nothing like God had intended it and created it to be. Now we know and understand in part that's because of Adam and Eve's decision in the garden to choose their own way, to choose their own understanding of good and bad or wrong and right. And still here, Abraham is experiencing what that's like. Now, God wanted humans to choose him and his way of living. But again and again, we've learned that they choose their own way and ignore God. God still has a plan to make all these wrong things right. He still has a plan to do it through a family line over many, many years. And that's the part of the role that Abraham plays. Once again, God was going to make another promise with Abraham, just like he did with Noah. We call this a covenant. And it's just like he did with Noah and the rainbow, sending the rainbow as a reminder and a promise that he would never flood the earth again in that same way. And he gives Abraham a promise or a covenant. God asks Abraham, how many stars are in the sky? And God was about to tell him this secret of what is to come. And so Abraham goes to count the stars, and he's trying to count all these stars. And of course, he had to tell God, there are too many to count. I don't know if you guys have ever been outside on a really dark night and seen all the stars in the sky and tried to count them all, but it is nearly impossible. God told Abraham as he's looking at the stars in the sky, I am going to give you so many children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and so on. You won't be able to count them either, just like you can't count the stars in the sky. Now, this idea was crazy to Abraham because how could he have a family? He and Sarah were old. They were past the age of having children. They didn't have any children. They didn't have any grandchildren. How in the world was this going to happen? What could God mean? God told Abraham, I will make your family very big until one day your family will number more than the stars in the sky. You will be my special family. You will be my people, and through you, the earth will be blessed. See, it was through Abraham's family line, hundreds of years later, that Jesus would be born. It was an incredible promise that God was going to rescue the world through Abraham's family. Jesus would be one of his relatives someday. Abraham had a hard time believing God. Who wouldn't when you're of old age and unable to have kids? How could this be true? Abraham says, it's too wonderful to believe. And God says, is there anything that's too good to be true? Is there anything that's too wonderful for me to do? So Abraham decided to trust God in that moment and trust what God said more than his eyes could see. Now, when Abraham's wife, Sarah, heard about God's promise, she laughed. Not a happy, joyful laugh, but more like a skeptical, I'm not sure, are you playing a joke on me kind of laugh. They'd waited for years and years to have children, and now they were old. How could this dream that she had be coming true now? Because it had to be too late. Sarah had a hard time believing that God could do what he promised. She'd forgotten that when God says something, it's as good as done. Sure enough, God delivered on his promise, and Sarah did have a baby boy. They named him Isaac, which means son of laughter. And this time they did laugh, but with joy and with happiness, because their dream did come true. And here was God following through, doing as he promised. He was choosing to look after Abraham's family, even during the times that Abraham and Sarah doubted God and tried to do things on their own, because they did. They were not perfect people. Sometimes they trusted God. Sometimes they didn't. One day, many, many years later, God would send another baby, and this baby would be the one who would bring joy into the world. This baby would be God once again, following through on his promise. So this morning, dive into the discussion questions, and I'll see you next week.